Hi, welcome to our legal series with Scott Mayer as our guest star here. I'm George Pino, CEO of Commercial Brokers International, and there's a couple topics that we're going to cover today, but actually today, I think for this video, we want to really specifically tie in with Measure ULA for the LA City and also Measure GS, which was Santa Monica City. So these were new taxes that were put in place due to the voting during the last elections, also called, they were misnamed a little bit of mansion tax because it doesn't affect just mansions, it affects anybody that falls within these certain price categories. And I think they're trying to tie it a little bit into the stepped up property tax, transfer tax that Culver City did, but I think that the cities here, both Los Angeles and Santa Monica, may have had a couple of issues in the way they wrote it, and I thought, we'd talk about that because I know there's some legal challenges. In fact, I think there was one recently filed, another one, I should say, recently filed with the city of Los Angeles, and I understand that there's one also in Santa Monica.
That's correct. So as a little background for our viewers, homelessness is a real concern in the city of Los Angeles and Santa Monica, and they put on the ballot the Measure ULA in Los Angeles and the Measure GS in Santa Monica as a means of raising funds to combat homelessness. And similar initiatives have been passed in the city of San Francisco and the city of Culver City, as you mentioned. The idea was to increase the documentary transfer tax, which currently exists in both jurisdictions, as a means of raising those funds. An idea being that those that own both residential properties and commercial properties that have significant values are able to bear the burden more than your average taxpayer. And so, for example, Measure ULA in Los Angeles, which is expected to raise over $900 million in its first year, will increase the transfer taxes that currently exist, which are at a rate of $5.60 per thousand, which is approximately 0.11%, to 4% for either a residence or a commercial property with a value in excess of $5 million, and will increase the transfer tax to 5.5% for a commercial or residential property in excess of $10 million.
And, I mean, that's a substantial tax. I know property taxes around the nation vary from different counties, but even the highest property tax areas are about 2%. We're talking about a 5.5% actual property transfer tax. So, it's a substantial amount, and, it goes from ultimately from that, for city of Los Angeles, that roughly $5.60 combined county and city tax, transfer tax, to over 50, almost 10 times as much.
Correct.
So that's got to be, I disagree a little bit with what you're saying about how, or not you, but how they phrased it, that, the larger properties should be able to bear the burden of a larger tax amount. Does that mean that the assumption is made that all the properties that they're selling are, they have realized gain, that they can actually afford to make this amount? Because, especially in this time frame, are there any contingencies put in place for, let's say I bought a property for $11 million and for whatever reason the economy is really bad, I'm having some issues, I have to turn around and sell it, but it's not the right time because interest rates are high and I only get $10 million. I still have to pay that $500,000 transfer tax, don't I, even though I'm lost $1 million already? Correct.
There's no credit for if you're selling your property at a loss.
Okay.
And there's no credit against the tax for your loan amount. It's based on the gross sales price.
All right, so that could actually affect some properties where they end up going, an owner may end up deciding, you know what, instead of taking that much of a loss and potentially also having some tax issues, maybe just let it go to foreclosure.
It could be. I don't think anyone truly understands the significance of or the effect of these taxes at this time. Especially with the market being in such turmoil as a result of inflation, high interest rates, issues with banks and lending practices. This is only going to throw another wrench into the whole commercial real estate sales world.
Yeah, I heard that $900 million number as well. I think they actually just revised. LA City just revised it based upon. It's funny you mentioned turmoil, because with turmoil comes, we even though sales activity has still been fairly robust, the overall sales have fallen. From last year, they're actually expecting only to raise about $600 million, about 25% less than they originally anticipated, $670 million now. So, and now they're saying they're not sure if that's enough to do what they want. So, what are they going to do with that money?
Well, that's a good question, because Los Angeles had a bond issuance a number of years ago to help with the homelessness issue. There was an increase in sales tax. Those monies were to go to help with homelessness issues. Although there have been some successes, I think there's some question about the validity of those programs. And so the question here is more money going to simply resolve the problem?
Yeah.
And we won't know that until the measure is allowed to proceed. They're both being challenged now, as you indicated in your first question. ULA is being challenged in court based on under the California Constitution, including Proposition 13, a transfer tax can only go to the general fund of the agency that is responsible for the taxing. And here, it's not going to Los Angeles' general fund. It's being specifically designated to address homelessness issues. It's going to be providing monies for additional affordable housing, and it's also going to provide help directly to tenants that need rent relief or income subsidies or legal representation. Measure GS is being challenged in court as well, and that's under a different theory. The idea under the California Constitution is that there has to be a single purpose for any such special tax. And in Santa Monica, under Measure GS, the funds are not only being used to help with homelessness issues, but 20% of the monies are being designated to support the Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. And so the argument is, instead of a single purpose, there are actually two purposes.
Sure. Completely understand that. Unless the single purpose is just to tax people. Which I could see them arguing that. That brings up actually some pretty good questions. Now, wasn't there also a question regarding the validity of the measure as far as getting it approved, where for lack of a better word, kind of a quorum. They had 51%, I think, was what they were using, but that should be under the California Constitution. Wasn't it a higher number, or?
Well, Measure ULA was actually approved by 58% of the voters. Not the residents of Los Angeles, but the registered voters. And there is actually a ballot initiative. In addition to the litigation that's been filed, there is a ballot initiative that has received over 1 million signatures already, and it's already qualified for the November 2024 election. And under that initiative, it's two prongs. First prong is that if the legislature passes a new tax, it has to go to the voters. They don't have the unilateral ability to pass a tax. The second prong is that if there is a special tax initiated by a city or county, that has to go to the voters, and instead of being subject to a simple majority, which ULA passed under, it has to pass under a 2/3 vote. And it would be retroactive, although it doesn't specifically name ULA, it would be retroactive and would void ULA.
Okay. Now, I'm going to throw you a curveball here, and I don't know if anyone can really answer this. So, because that all of a sudden brings up a whole slew of questions in my mind. Because I do a lot of 1031 exchange work. I work with a lot of investors, and a lot of people that are selling property, specifically investment property in this price range, use the tax code to their advantage, especially 1031 exchanges, where they sell the property and they exchange into another property to avoid, or I shouldn't say avoid, but to defer capital gains tax. So, which is, combined in the dollar amounts that we're talking about, you have a 25% capital gains tax on the federal side, and then the state taxes their capital gains as income, which on the high end is 13.3%. So we're looking at 38.3% to almost 40% with some of the other additional taxes that the IRS has for investment tax purposes as well. So the question I have, and I can tell by your face you know where I'm going.
Yes.
If a seller is going forward and they do the 1031 exchange, but the fees are collected as far as the transfer tax, and let's say it's in that 11 million range where you're paying 600,000 plus in transfer tax. That's taken off your realized gain to get you a realized profit based upon your 1031 exchange.
Yes.
Now, however, if the measure is found to be ULA or Measure GS is found to be illegal or unsound or it's repealed, by either one of those mechanisms, I'm thinking the actual lawsuits going after them, but also the measure that they're proposing for the voting of the 2/3 majority. So the question I have is then, can the owner that did the sale get their money back? Because I know they filed for preliminary injunction to stop the tax during this time.
Yes.
However, that didn't get approved. So will they be able to get their money back? I have a two-pronged question, and if they do, will potentially have to pay capital gains tax on that as well, which causes them damages that they might be able to come back after the city or anyone else.
Yeah. So it's my understanding that the city of Los Angeles is going to proceed with the collection of tax, which goes into effect April 1st of 2023, this year. They intend to collect the tax. And there's some discussion that because of the pending litigation and the pending initiative, that the city will just escrow those monies so that they have them available if they have to pay them back. I don't know if a similar effort is being conducted with respect to Measure GS. I would think so. But you raise a really good point. Those monies, if returned, would be deemed income, and I imagine there will be a taxpayer or group of taxpayers who are going to get back substantial amounts of money. They're not going to want to pay regular income tax or capital gains tax, and they will file some suit, with the Franchise Tax Board, with the IRS, to receive, some sort of offset.
Okay. Well, it almost sounds like they were kind of in a rush to get these, maybe to get some votes and kind of push these through without looking at all aspects of the legality of the potential measures that open up for challenges. But, I did expect it, even when I first saw it coming out, to have some legal challenges just because of, it affects so many people and will affect the real estate, I think, negatively for a while. I mean, already we're seeing a little bit of a pushback from sellers and buyers that when the sellers are trying to get the buyers to pay for it right now.
Well, one of the arguments that was presented and was supported by a paper out of UCLA is that this tax won't affect rents, either residential rents or commercial rents. So tenants will be protected, but it will have a chilling effect on the sales market. You've got sellers who now have to pay this tax. They weren't taking it into account. It's going to lower their return. They're likely, if they choose to move forward and sell their property, residential or commercial, they'll try to, I suppose, pass it along to a buyer.
Yeah.
I doubt a buyer will, unless they really treasure the property, I doubt the buyer will pick it up because they themselves will have to pay the tax when they sell, and it's already going to affect their long-term returns, and so they're going to want to pay less. So a seller's either going to want more money to compensate them for the tax, and a buyer's going to want to pay less money because they're taking into account this tax and how it affects their returns.
Yep, absolutely. You know, and as good of a school as UCLA is, maybe not the best one in Los Angeles, but sorry, fight on. So I do disagree a little bit. I think it won't have an effect on residential rents, where there are a lot of protections in for the tenants and whatnot. But I think when it comes to commercial rents, when you have investors looking at investment horizons that are 5 to 7 years in length, and with lease terms that are 3 to 5 years, if you're doing that, I'm going to be trying to push those rents as high as I can, because on a cap rate basis, it increases the value substantially, upwards of multiples of 20 for every dollar that you actually generate in additional income. It can potentially have a multiple of a 20 effect on, or more, on the value of the end property, which can then offset the actual taxes if a smart investor is looking that way and they have the time to do so.
And the paper did take that into account, and their simplistic argument was, and I'm not saying it's right or it's wrong, but their argument was, landlords are already doing that. Landlords are already pushing rents as high as they can anyway, and that the market's going to determine what people will pay or will not pay. So, and this is, again, where a commercial tenant may want a smart real estate lawyer, because if I'm a commercial landlord, I'm going to say that I can collect these sorts of taxes in the future. And of course, a commercial tenant doesn't want to pay a landlord's transfer taxes, period. And so this is, again, where you need someone to watch out for your interests and make sure that you're not overpaying as a commercial tenant.
Yeah, well, it sounds, actually, this sounds like it's going to be really interesting to watch. Don't forget to break out your popcorn and see what ends up happening overall. It's definitely going to be interesting, because I think it's going to set the bar for what happens with other cities down the road, and not just in California, but also throughout the United States. California tends to be forerunners when it comes to taxing, with other states adopting some of the principles and ideas at that point as well. So keep your eyes out, take a look at that, and we'll check back in also down the road and a little bit later this year and see how things are going with the measures. Thanks for joining in. Don't forget to subscribe and like. Thank you.
Thank you.